The mammoth dropped a steaming pile the size of a hovercar on their ship, then turned and sneezed a cloud of snot onto the windshield. Captain Varn blinked his 6 eyes in disbelief while the crew scrambled to identify what kind of intergalactic death beast they had just encountered. ZYP, the mission biologist, let out a whimper that translated roughly to, "We have landed on a primitive death world. Request immediate extraction." The planet was Earth. The year was unknowable. And the universe had just taken a sharp left turn into chaos. They weren't even supposed to land. The mission file clearly stated, observational only. Hover above the surface, scan for microbial life, maybe snap a few photos of the swirling glaciers and volcanic vents, then leave. Easy. Uncomplicated. A safe field assignment for a crew fresh out of the academy with degrees in xenobotany, galactic ethics, and laser safety protocols. No one mentioned giant hairy monsters with nasal artillery and questionable toilet habits. The crew had landed near a jagged glacier, hoping to study what appeared to be a concentrated energy signal buried beneath. ZYP thought it might be an ancient core fragment, or maybe even a prebiotic reactor. The readings were off the charts: heat signatures, magnetic anomalies, something pulsing under the ice like a dormant heartbeat. They weren't prepared for it to start beating. While the others argued about the ethical implications of digging into a possibly sacred planetary site, ZYP pressed the melt sequence on their thermal probe. The ice hissed, cracked, and buckled. A mist rose into the air like a ghost exhaling after 1,000 years. The glacier split open, revealing a figure encased in crystalline frost. It was upright, humanoid, naked, holding a stone-tipped spear. And then it moved. The alien crew screamed. Not because it was hideous. No, quite the opposite. The figure emerging from the ice was terrifyingly perfect. Tall, muscular, expression like thunderclouds. Eyes like something ancient had just remembered its name. He stepped forward, water trailing from his skin, and surveyed the ship, the aliens, the landscape. Then he spoke in perfect galactic standard. "You melted the wrong glacier." The crew stared at him, speechless. Captain Varn, whose translator gland was still buffering, said the only words he could process. "Sir, are you from here?" The man sniffed the air, flexed his fingers, and tilted his head. "From here? That depends. What year is it?" The crew exchanged worried looks. ZYP answered, voice shaky. "According to your planet's primitive rotation cycle, we believe this is approximately year 20,015 BC. The man exhaled slowly. Then he laughed, a deep, human sound, rich with something close to grief. He turned to the glacier behind him. "Then it's already happened," he said. "The fall." They learned his name was Kale. He didn't ask questions about the ship or the aliens. He seemed unsurprised. Almost as if he'd been expecting something, someone. He ate their ration cubes with mild disgust, called them taste-proof bricks, and requested meat. Real meat. Not synthesized or printed. ZYP, desperate to impress, went to negotiate with the local apex predator population and promptly got chased by a saber-toothed cat. Kale saved him with one throw of his spear. The spear was made of stone and wood, but when Kale held it, it hummed. It shimmered faintly, like something more advanced was hidden within. The aliens began to suspect Kale wasn't just an unusually advanced primitive. He might be something else entirely. Something older. Around the campfire, a warming drone converted for Kale's comfort, he began to speak. Not in grand revelations, but in strange fragments. Memories out of order. Cities made of crystal. A sky that changed colors with the seasons. Machines that whispered secrets into children's minds. Then war. Fire. Silence. He had been frozen not by accident, but by design. Somewhere beyond the stars, Kale said, there were people who built too much, too fast. They reached into time and pulled back nightmares. And when those nightmares came through, they did not discriminate. Civilization fell like snow, quiet, then buried everything. Captain Varn asked if Kale had any idea who these people were. Kale looked at him with a tired smile. "You're wearing their logo on your sleeve." The crew ran diagnostics. ZYP compared the ancient atmospheric data to current readings. There were discrepancies. Massive ones. As if the Earth had rebooted itself. Massive extinction events. Climate shifts. Radiation pockets where none should be. They had assumed this was the dawn of intelligent life. It was actually after the sunset. Then came the sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't thunder. It was a low growl in the sky, like something scraping its claws across the atmosphere. Kale stood instantly. His spear began to glow. It found me, he said. The creature descended from the sky like a comet, long, black, jagged limbs trailing shadows. It moved with impossible geometry, bending light around it. The ship's defenses kicked in, but the creature ignored them. It was after Kale. The crew scrambled. Captain Varn shouted orders. ZYP hid inside a sleeping bag. Kale stood alone in front of the glacier, the firelight painting his silhouette in gold and crimson. He didn't run. He waited. The creature stopped. They stared at each other for what felt like hours. Then it let out a screech that made every alien scream and shorted the ship's sensors. It remembers me, Kale said. But not just me. ZYP whispered, What is it? Kale looked toward the stars. Something your people built, and forgot. By morning, the creature was gone. But it left behind scorch marks in the snow, and a claw mark on the glacier so deep it reached the core. Kale sat by the fire, silent. Captain Varn approached with a translator orb. Kale, he said, what exactly are you? Kale stared at the rising sun, his eyes reflecting something far more ancient than any of them could comprehend. I'm what happens when history refuses to die. And now that I'm awake, either will Earth. No one spoke. Then the mammoth from earlier returned, dropped another load on the ship, and sneezed again. Kale chuckled. Well, looks like I'm home. The sun didn't rise so much as bleed across the sky, a sluggish golden smear behind a curtain of icy clouds. The alien crew huddled inside their half-crushed landing pod, arguing over who would be the first to file the disaster report. ZYP insisted the mission wasn't technically compromised because the mammoth hadn't meant to attack, and Captain Varn was furiously polishing the snot off the ship's navigation lens with a piece of his own robe. Meanwhile, Kale was roasting something suspiciously feline over a makeshift Spitfire and humming an ancient melody that none of their translators could identify. They watched him from a safe distance. His calm was unnerving. He moved like he'd been here before, like this wasn't the first time he'd eaten breakfast surrounded by extraterrestrial voyeurs and snowdrifts taller than a stilt beast from Sector 9. The creature from the sky hadn't returned, but its shadow still lingered in their minds. Captain Varn replayed the footage on loop, scanning every frame for anomalies. He found dozens. Temporal echoes. Molecular distortion. Chronofissures. Kale's presence was more than an evolutionary outlier. It was a paradox, wrapped in muscle, draped in mammoth hide, and armed with a stone spear that occasionally flickered with plasma. ZYP finally gathered enough courage to approach him. Kale looked up mid-bite, tearing into a leg of meat with the satisfaction of a man who'd fought a tiger and won. Do you want some? Kale asked, offering the charred limb. Tastes like regret and fur. ZYP declined, choosing instead to ask the question gnawing at every member of the crew. How do you speak our language? Kale chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth on his wrist, then pointed at his temple. Mimetic implants. My generation was built for first contact. We absorbed language like you absorb guilt and bureaucracy. Captain Varn stepped forward, arms crossed in what he assumed was an authoritative posture. Your generation? Are you saying your people existed before recorded Earth history? Kale stood, taller than anyone expected, and walked to the edge of the glacier. The wind howled as if it too were straining to hear what he might say. We didn't just exist. We ruled. We tamed storms, sculpted time, danced on tectonic plates. And then we burned it all down. We were the warning no one left behind. ZYP blinked. But how? Why? Kale turned slowly, his eyes darker now. Because some of us wanted to become gods. and others refused to be ruled by them. They listened as Kale told fragments of his story. A war fought not with weapons, but with time itself. Two factions within the ancient human civilization, those who sought ascension through manipulation of space-time, and those who warned that such power would collapse the very fabric of existence. Kale had been a hunter, a warrior bred for precision and survival. He was one of the chosen, frozen in time as part of what they called Project Reboot, a failsafe in case the world broke. It did. Kale's memories were broken, scattered like leaves in a storm. He remembered faces but not names, places without coordinates. But the fear was intact. And the feeling that something survived the war besides him. The creature, the one that had descended from the sky like a fallen god, was no animal. It had been designed by hands older than bones, programmed to seek out anomalies and erase them. ZYP asked if it was a weapon. Worse, Kale said. It was a memory with claws. It doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive. Later that day, the crew attempted a full bioscan on Kale. The results caused 2 engineers to faint and 1 to question his belief in molecular stability. Kale's DNA wasn't just human, it was advanced. 12% of it was categorized as unknown, but structurally superior. Embedded memory strands, adaptive immune chains, quantum-stabilized mitochondria. He wasn't just a relic. He was a prototype. He's what humans were meant to become, ZYP whispered. No, Kale corrected. I'm what we were before we fell apart. As night returned thicker than before, the temperature dropped fast. Snow howled across the camp like a warning. Kale stood at the edge of the cliff, staring into the darkness. The wind carried strange sounds, echoes that didn't belong. At one point, the crew heard laughter. Not Kale's. Not theirs. Something else. Something cold. Captain Varn insisted they return to orbit and report immediately. Kale said no. He explained that leaving now wouldn't save them. The creature would follow. It didn't care about geography. It followed signals. Echoes. Traces of deviation. And the crew, by waking him, had just lit the brightest flare in the universe. We didn't mean to interfere, ZYP said. We were just observing. Kale turned, voice low. You were observing a graveyard. And you kicked open a coffin. They doubled security. Not that it mattered. The creature wasn't physical in the way they understood. It moved like a thought. It warped time, turning minutes into hours, and hours into screams. One of the drones captured a blurred silhouette just beyond the trees. A long, bent figure, twitching with impossible joints. It vanished the moment Kale looked toward it. He slept little, if at all. He was preparing. Sharpening the spear. Drawing strange symbols into the snow. When ZYP asked what they meant, Kale said they were reminders. In case he forgot again. The human brain wasn't built to hold time like a suitcase. Eventually it spilled. That night, Kale gathered the crew around the fire. For once, he wasn't joking. His face was hard. His voice steady. There's something buried in this land. Not just me. The others, the ones from my time. Some of them didn't want to fight. They ran. Hid. Some froze themselves. Some became something else. ZYP asked if they could be saved. Maybe, Kale said. Or maybe they're part of the infection now. The wind shifted. Kale stood, staring into the trees. The fire sputtered. The lights dimmed. And then, from the shadows, a shape began to emerge. Kale stepped forward, raising his spear. Stay behind me, he said. This part gets messy. It began with a glitch. A subtle flicker in the ship's internal systems, like the universe had hiccuped and forgot how time was supposed to flow. The fire that Kale had lit earlier sputtered backwards for a second, the flames dancing in reverse, and then surged forward again. ZYP noticed it first. He was cataloging snow fungus samples when his scanning goggles froze, rebooted, and displayed every known planetary language at once. Captain Varn dismissed it as an environmental fluctuation until the ship's AI let out a confused mechanical groan and said the sun had risen twice in the same moment. Kale simply stood in the center of it all, motionless, like he had seen this before. Like he had been waiting for it. The crew gathered around the latest data. Temporal dissonance spikes. Quantum reverberations echoing through the atmosphere. The word they all tried not to say was timequake. But there it was, showing up on every graph and sensor. Something had been awakened, and time itself was beginning to distort around it. ZYP, in a rare moment of calm, ran a full genome reanalysis on Kale's blood, taken during his earlier scan. The results arrived in fragments, the system stuttering through layers of information it didn't have the vocabulary to describe. Buried deep inside Kale's DNA was something wrong. Not corrupted or mutated. Just too advanced. 12% of his genome was completely alien, not in origin, but in function. It behaved like living code, capable of rewriting itself in real time. It was ancient, precise, and reactive to threats. Kale didn't seem surprised. He leaned over the console, scanning the readouts, then pointed at a sequence that looped endlessly. "That part doesn't belong to me," he said. "That's from the architects." Captain Varn asked who the architects were. Kale hesitated. Then he said they were the ones who first touched time. They built cities under oceans, in clouds, across dimensions. They lived side by side with early humanity, guiding them, studying them, shaping them. But somewhere along the line, they disagreed. Some believed humans were dangerous. Too adaptable. Too emotional. The architects tried to cleanse the species by setting back time, erasing critical junctions in Earth's evolution. They failed. And in failing, they created monsters. One of them being the Old One, the creature that now stalked them in silence, just out of sight. The Old One, Kale said, wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to erase. To correct deviations. Anything or anyone who didn't match the expected evolutionary path was marked for elimination. Kale was one of those deviations. His whole generation was. And now, by awakening him, the alien crew had triggered the creature's recall sequence. It was coming not just for Kale, but for everything that had touched him. That included the crew, their ship, and possibly all nearby life. "We need to leave," Varn said. "Now." Kale shook his head. "You leave, and you take it with you. It will follow. And if it gets off this planet, it won't stop." ZYP asked what could stop it. Kale didn't answer at first. Then he said he needed to return to the ruins. The place where he was originally frozen. There were machines buried there, ancient ones. Some still powered by the Earth's natural energy grid. One of them might be able to slow the creature down. Or trap it. But going back would be dangerous. The time distortions were getting stronger. Already, some trees near the edge of the glacier had started to shift through growth cycles in minutes, sprouting, blooming, and dying all within the span of an hour. Small animals wandered in and aged into skeletons before collapsing. The forest was turning into a minefield of unstable reality. The aliens had no combat training. Their version of self-defense was to hide behind paperwork and beg for permission to be rescued. But they followed Kale anyway. Maybe it was fear. Maybe fascination. Maybe something deeper, an understanding that whatever he was connected to a truth too large to ignore. As they moved through the frozen valley, time pulses throbbed through the air like drumbeats. Snow fell upward in some places. Footprints vanished as soon as they were made. They reached the ruins by sunset. What remained was a partial dome structure embedded in the ice, metallic yet organic in design. Vines of frozen energy crawled along its surface, pulsing faintly. Kale approached it with reverence, pressing his palm against a triangular panel. The wall responded, sliding open with a hiss of steam and light. Inside were chambers that defied physics. Ceilings taller than they appeared from outside. Light that cast no shadow. Floating glyphs made of language itself. "This is where I became what I am," Kale said quietly. "This place was a testing ground. A forge for prototypes. When the war came, they sealed us in stasis. We were supposed to be the beginning of something better." Captain Varn stepped cautiously into the room. "And what happened?" Kale smiled without humor. We were forgotten. They activated what systems still functioned. One chamber still contained a working transchronal generator. Cale began adjusting its parameters, inputting coordinates only he understood. He explained that it was a chronodivergence loop, a machine that could isolate a moment in time and loop it endlessly, trapping anything inside. If they could lure the old one into the generator's radius, they could lock it there forever. But there was a risk. The machine was unstable. It hadn't been used in over 20,000 years. And someone would need to activate it manually from within the field. ZYP protested. There had to be another way. Captain Varn tried to offer alternatives. Cale just stared at the machine. I was born for this, he said. I died once already. This time, maybe it'll stick. Then the creature arrived. It didn't walk in. It bled into the room through cracks in reality, a smear of shadow and impossible limbs. Lights flickered, time bent. One of the engineers aged 30 years in seconds and vanished into dust. The crew scattered. Cale stood firm. He shouted at it, taunting it, daring it. And the old one responded. The battle was unlike anything the crew could understand. Cale moved faster than thought, his spear now glowing fully, emitting pulses that tore through time distortion like waves through water. The creature fought back with screams that bent the walls, claws that sliced through seconds and left minutes bleeding. The dome shook. Cale shouted to Varn. Now. Captain Varn hesitated, then hit the final sequence. The loop began. Light engulfed the chamber. The creature lunged. Cale roared. And then silence. The room returned to stillness. The old one was gone. Cale was gone. The loop was active. And time, for a moment, held its breath. The silence after Cale vanished was not ordinary silence. It had weight. It pressed against the ears of the alien crew like the gravity of a collapsed star. Time felt paused, the air still vibrating from the creature's scream and Cale's final charge into the chronodivergence field. The walls of the dome hummed softly, the loop quietly spinning in the heart of the structure, keeping whatever battle continued inside sealed and isolated from the rest of the world. But outside that sealed moment, the crew was left adrift in something just as terrifying: uncertainty. Captain Varn stared at the pulsing machinery, his face unreadable. ZYP stood beside him, still holding the scanning device that had tracked Cale's biosignatures. The signal had stopped entirely, as if Cale had never existed. One of the crew members tried to speak, but the words collapsed in his throat. No one knew what to say. They hadn't just lost a primitive anomaly, they had lost the only being who truly understood what was happening on this planet. And perhaps, the only one who could have stopped it all from spiraling even further. The crew stayed the night in the dome, their ship too damaged to offer shelter. As they attempted to analyze the time loop mechanism from a safe distance, ZYP initiated what he called Flashback Protocol, a desperate attempt to recover Cale's imprinted memories from the console he had touched. Ancient human tech, especially from Cale's era, had the ability to sync with its user, storing fragments of their thoughts, reflexes, even genetic intuition into crystalline memory fields. If ZYP could unlock it, they might gain insight into the full truth of what Cale had been. The process took hours. The machine resisted at first, perhaps unsure of their intentions, or simply unused to being operated by alien hands. But finally, the glyphs on the walls shimmered, and the dome filled with sound. Not just sound, sensation. The air thickened, shadows shifted, and the crew found themselves standing inside Cale's memories. They were no longer in the frozen dome, but on a plateau above a vast city of crystal. Towers of light stretched toward a sky teeming with hovering craft. People moved like currents of thought, dressed in flowing robes embedded with living circuitry. Children played with shapes that floated mid-air, solving puzzles made of gravity. And Cale stood among them, not as a hunter, but as a student. A learner. Young, curious, dangerous. The memory shifted. Now they were in a great hall, where arguments echoed between factions. On one side, the architects, beings of immense intelligence and control, discussed the risk of unrestricted evolution. They had once helped birth human civilization, but now feared what it was becoming. On the other side, the Emergence Collective, led by humans who believed in their right to continue evolving, even if it meant surpassing the architects. Then the vote. Then the betrayal. Kale, now a soldier, was armed not just with weapons, but with genetic enhancements that let him feel probability, react to threats before they existed, learn languages in minutes. He and others like him were designed to protect what remained of humanity's free will. The final vote came too late. The architects had already activated the old ones, creatures of logic and deletion, programmed to erase deviation and reset planetary life. The memory flashed again. War. Cities burning. Whole continents consumed by folds in time. Species blinking out of existence. Kale and a handful of others were ordered to retreat to the deep freeze vaults, to be locked away beneath the ice, hoping that someday, when the danger passed, they could return and help rebuild. It was humanity's last card. The world above them collapsed into myth and silence. ZYP ended the memory playback. The crew stood in the dim glow of the dome, eyes wide with the weight of what they had seen. It was no longer a question of observation or interference. Their presence had already triggered the past to bleed into the present, and whatever humanity once was, or could have been, now depended on what they did next. But then something strange happened. One of the consoles lit up on its own. A faint signal pulsed through the floor, matching a rhythm they had heard before, Kale's heartbeat. It wasn't coming from inside the loop. It was coming from deeper in the dome. ZYP and two others followed the signal through a series of collapsing corridors and time-warped hallways until they found it. Another stasis chamber. But this one wasn't empty. Inside, floating in suspended animation, was a woman. She looked human, but not like the humans they had seen in primitive holographs. Her body was embedded with intricate neural circuitry, her skin laced with light-reactive patterns. Her eyes were closed, but the chamber showed activity. High neural function. Dreaming. Processing. Preparing. ZYP accessed the panel, translating its ancient symbols. The name encoded on the chamber was Arya. Role strategist. Generation, Omega class. Before the others could suggest caution, Arya's eyes opened. She sat up slowly, blinking at the aliens around her as if they were insects buzzing around her thoughts. Then she stood, moved to the console, and ran her fingers over the interface like someone waking a sleeping animal. The entire dome shifted, reconfiguring itself. Holograms appeared, maps, timelines, conflict matrices. Arya spoke, her voice sharp and calculated. "Where is Kale?" Captain Varn explained what had happened. She listened without emotion, then walked to the edge of the chronodivergence field, watching the pulse of time inside. Her expression didn't change, but the crew sensed the tension in her posture. ZYP asked her if she knew Kale. She said yes. They had trained together. Fought together. Failed together. Then Arya said something that chilled them. Kale wasn't supposed to be awakened alone. There were supposed to be 7. ZYP asked where the others were. Arya said she didn't know. Their chambers had been scattered during the collapse. Some may have been destroyed. Others may still be sleeping. Or worse, corrupted. The creature you saw, Arya said, is not the only one. The old ones are drawn to time anomalies, but they are also drawn to us. To what we represent. Captain Varn asked her what they should do now. She looked at the loop. Then back at them. We finish what we started. Or the next reset will not leave anything behind. And for the first time, they all understood the stakes. Kale had trapped one monster. But more were coming. The air inside the dome felt tighter now, like the walls themselves were aware of what was happening beyond them. Arya moved with a kind of mechanical grace, her footsteps precise, her gestures efficient, her mind already 5 steps ahead of every question the crew was trying to form. She stood before the control console, fingers dancing across the ancient interface, accessing functions the aliens barely understood. The dome responded to her like it had been waiting for her touch. Lights shifted. Walls parted. New corridors opened into spaces that had remained sealed for 20,000 years. Beneath it all, a deep humming began to rise, low and steady, like the breathing of something immense awakening underground. Captain Varn followed cautiously, ZYP close behind, trying to record everything and understand nothing at the same time. Arya spoke without turning around. The loop won't hold forever. The old one is resisting the containment. Kale can't keep it trapped alone. He's strong, but not immortal. If it breaks free before we're ready, there won't be a second chance. ZYP hesitated before asking what she planned to do. She pointed toward the lower levels, where the dome connected to Earth's geothermal arteries. Deep beneath the ice, the original generators were still intact. They had once powered the entire stasis vault, and more than that, a weapon. Not a traditional one. Something ancient, conceptual, designed to rewrite the narrative threads of localized time. A chronoscript engine. When activated, it could create a divergence, a new thread of history that rewrote the outcome of an event while preserving the memory of what came before. But using it came at a cost. One of equal value had to be removed to make space for the rewritten moment. Captain Varn frowned, trying to grasp the implications. If we use it, we can stop the creature? Arya corrected him. No. We can rewrite the moment it was ever created. Prevent it from existing at all. But it will erase something else. A person. A place. A memory. Possibly one of us. That is the balance. ZYP's voice trembled slightly. What if it rewrites the wrong thing? Then we may save the past but lose ourselves, Arya answered. They descended into the lower levels, following the pulse of ancient power lines that still glowed faintly beneath the frost. The further they went, the more twisted time became. The walls sometimes looked older than the universe, and sometimes newer than the ship they arrived in. ZYP dropped a data pad and watched it hover mid-fall for several seconds before hitting the floor with a thud that echoed like a distant thunderclap in reverse. Arya didn't flinch. She seemed used to the instability. The chronoscript engine sat in the heart of the vault, a monolith of spiraling rings and fractal coils that shimmered with equations too complex to be visual. Arya approached it and began aligning its coordinates, drawing energy from the geothermal vents, stabilizing the loop Kale was caught inside, and preparing the divergence. As she worked, Varn looked around, scanning the chamber, and noticed something strange in one of the alcoves. There was a console, slightly damaged, covered in ice. He brushed it off and saw a list of stasis units. Hundreds of them. Some marked active, others destroyed. But 7 were marked as Omega prototypes. 1 active. 1 in the loop. 5 unknown. Arya confirmed it. They had been scattered during the collapse. She and Kale were only the first 2 to awaken. The rest were still out there. Sleeping. Lost. Or worse. We're not enough to win, Arya admitted. But we might be enough to delay. We activate the divergence, send the signal, and hope it reaches them. If even one more awakens, the timeline can shift again. Then came the betrayal. One of the alien crew, a technician named Reld, who had said little since their arrival, suddenly stepped back from the group, holding a portable disruptor. He aimed it at the engine and ordered Arya to step away. His voice shook but was firm. We can't risk this. The directive was clear. If contamination exceeds protocol, we erase the source and move on. Captain Varn stared in shock. You're not authorized to make that call. Reld replied coldly. I'm not asking permission. You're too close to it. We all are. This world is broken. These people are extinct. We don't rewrite time to save ghosts. Arya didn't move. She merely stared at him, then said quietly, That ghost saved your life last night. The standoff held for several heartbeats. Then ZYP moved. He tackled Reld to the ground just as the disruptor fired, the beam slicing through a power conduit and sending sparks across the room. The engine shuddered, the walls groaned, and time stuttered again. For a brief second, they all saw flashes of different outcomes. Kale standing in a ruined city. Arya weeping beside a stasis pod. ZYP screaming in a forest of stars. Then everything snapped back into place. Arya moved fast. She sealed the doors, reset the engine, and activated the lock. The machine began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, drawing in power from the planet's core. The room grew hot, impossibly bright. Arya shouted to Varn. "Once I start the divergence, you have to leave. The ship is your only safe distance." Varn protested. "You'll die." She nodded. "Possibly. But someone has to remember." ZYP handed her a memory seed, a small crystalline device capable of storing experiences, thoughts, and sensory impressions. "Take this. Even if we fail, someone will know." Arya took it without a word. The engine reached full capacity. Arya pressed the sequence. A column of light shot upward, piercing through the dome, the glacier, the sky itself. Somewhere above, the creature within the loop howled. Kale's voice echoed faintly through the chamber, not in pain, but in triumph. The divergence began. Reality shimmered. The sky split. Time bled. And then it stopped. Silence. Arya was gone. The engine powered down. The room was empty. Varn and ZYP stumbled out of the vault, dazed, unsure what had changed, only that something had. The glacier looked different. The stars overhead pulsed with a rhythm they hadn't seen before. And the ship, miraculously, was repaired. But more than that, ZYP held a scanner, and it was picking up a signal. A human signal. Not Kale. Not Arya. A third. And it was getting closer. The first thing they saw was a flicker in the tree line, like a shadow moving against time instead of through it. The signal ZYP tracked grew stronger with every step, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the earth beneath their feet, as if whoever or whatever was approaching was part of the planet's heartbeat itself. The snow no longer fell in a straight line. It looped in small, slow spirals, like the world was holding its breath. Captain Varn kept one hand on the scanner, the other near the emergency recall beacon, even though he knew full well there was no one left in orbit to answer. The figure stepped into view slowly. She moved with grace but not hesitation, each footfall deliberate. She wore a suit made of dark, obsidian-colored armor that shimmered in the cold, reflecting glimpses of things that hadn't happened yet. Her eyes glowed faintly, the color of melting starlight. Her hair was pulled back in a warrior's knot, but her expression was more curious than hostile. She stopped several paces from them, looking directly at ZYP, then at Varn, then finally at the distant pulse of the now dormant divergence engine. She spoke calmly, with the confidence of someone who had lived through extinction before breakfast. "My name is Arya. Where is Kale?" ZYP blinked, confused. "Arya?" But Arya activated the divergence. "You can't be her. We saw her." "I know," she interrupted. "I am not that Arya. I am another." This version was hidden further down in the sequence. Activated only if the timeline shifted in a specific direction. The divergence rewrote history. I was reawakened because of it. Varn stepped forward slowly. "So, what now? Are you here to finish what the others started?" Arya turned toward the east, where the sky had fractured just slightly above the horizon, a faint crack of shimmering distortion that pulsed like an open wound in the fabric of the world. "I am here to find the others. There are more of us. Kale and the first Arya were only the beginning. This planet was never meant to evolve one timeline. It was designed for many. And each reset left remnants behind." ZYP looked at the scanner again, now detecting not one, but four additional signals flickering in the distance. Each was faint, dormant, scattered across different quadrants of the planet. Some buried beneath mountains, others beneath oceans. The network was waking up. "Why us, though?" ZYP asked. "Why not let humanity rediscover itself? Why involve off-worlders like us?" Arya looked at him with something almost resembling a smile. "Because you were the first to come without war in your hands. The architects built safeguards, but they didn't expect empathy. You gave Kale a reason to fight again. That changed everything." Varn wasn't convinced. "And what happens if we fail? If these other signals are corrupted, or worse, if they become something like the old ones?" "Then this world resets again," Arya answered. "But not cleanly. With each reboot, the echoes grow louder. Eventually, the fabric tears too wide to stitch shut. She began walking again, toward the pulsing horizon. ZYP and Varn followed without needing to ask where she was going. The closest signal was only a few kilometers away, beneath a frozen lake that shimmered with ancient code written across its surface in frost patterns too symmetrical to be natural. As they crossed the ice, time warped again. ZYP saw reflections of cities that never existed, buildings that hovered above the water, lights flickering in spiraling language around them. They reached the center. Arya knelt, pressed her hand against the ice. It responded immediately, melting in a perfect circle, revealing a chamber below. Inside, another stasis pod, dormant but pulsing. The being inside was different. Broader, armor-plated, but unmistakably human in form. His skin was tattooed with runes, each one glowing with residual energy. Arya activated the pod. The being inside gasped, then opened his eyes. "Another one of us," Arya said. The man sat up coughing, then looked around. His voice was rough, broken by time. "How long?" Arya answered simply. "Long enough." Varn watched them interact with unease and fascination. These weren't just humans. They were blueprints from a lost age. Pieces of a weapon that thought, breathed, and evolved. Each one of them carried knowledge, power, and purpose that defied logic. And now, they were waking up. They moved to the next site. A jungle hidden beneath the ice, thawed by geothermal vents. There, another pod was found, this one containing a woman with silver eyes and mirrored skin. She awoke without speaking, instantly scanning her surroundings, calculating, remembering. She and Arya exchanged nods. No words necessary. With each new awakening, the air grew heavier. The sky seemed to watch. Somewhere deep in the distance, the sound of something ancient stirred. Not the old one, but something even older. Not a predator, but a judge. Something that watched timelines like stories and decided which ones were worth reading. By the time the fourth figure was awakened, a tall, thin man with hands that sparked when he touched stone, Arya gathered them all in the center of the valley Kale had once stood in. The loop chamber still pulsed gently behind them, a tomb and a beacon all at once. The 5 humans formed a circle. They closed their eyes. The earth vibrated. Varn and ZYP backed away instinctively. Arya opened her eyes again, now blazing with light. The others did the same. Their presence was rewriting the space around them, bending light, gravity, even memory. ZYP felt his own thoughts slip sideways for a moment, glimpsing futures that never came to pass and pasts that had never happened. The humans spoke in unison. "We remember." And then, something answered. The ground cracked. The sky split open once more. But this time, it wasn't the old one. It was a projection. A message burned into the world itself. The architects. Not as they had been, but as they had become. Disembodied will. Living logic. They spoke in every language at once. You awaken them again. You resist again. The loop was mercy. This is defiance. Arya stepped forward, voice steady. This is evolution. The architects paused. The projection shimmered, then fractured. Your kind destroyed balance. Arya nodded. And yours feared it. A final pulse rippled across the land. The projection faded. And for the first time, the crew felt the weight lift. The humans turned to the aliens. Arya spoke softly. We're going to leave this world now. Not to escape. To warn others. To wake the ones sleeping on other planets. The architects ceded more than Earth. This is bigger than one planet's history. It's about the right to grow. Varn asked the question that lingered in his mind. What if they fight back? Arya smiled. Then we fight better. The humans vanished in a flash of light, riding currents of probability the crew couldn't follow. ZYP turned to Varn. So what do we do now? Varn looked at the sky, at the stars slowly realigning, at the feeling that history had just taken a new breath. We remember. And then, we tell the story,